win. I don't think he could win. He's too progressive coming from this state and what he's done in this state to win in any southern state, any.
The political landscape in California has become a lightning rod for criticism, with Governor Gavin Newsom at the center of a storm of discontent. Critics argue that his leadership has turned the Golden State into a cautionary tale of progressive policies gone awry, a narrative amplified by commentators like Bill Maher, who has not held back in his scathing critiques. Maher, a longtime Californian and political observer, has expressed frustration with Newsom's governance, painting a picture of a state spiraling under mismanagement, excessive regulations, and a failure to address crises effectively. This sentiment, echoed across various platforms, raises questions about Newsom's viability as a national figure, particularly as his name is frequently floated for the Democratic presidential nomination in 2028. Maher's critique, delivered with his signature blend of wit and exasperation, focuses on what he sees as California's descent into chaos under Newsom's watch. He points to the state's response to recent crises, from wildfires to civil unrest, as evidence of leadership that is either incompetent or deliberately neglectful. The wildfires that ravaged Los Angeles expose what many see as a sluggish and disorganized government response, with resources stretched thin and coordination lacking. Maher has described the state's bureaucracy as a Kafkaesque nightmare, where excessive regulations stifle progress and make even basic governance feel like navigating an endless maze. This sentiment resonates with many Californians who feel that their state, once a beacon of opportunity, is now bogged down by red tape and political posturing. One specific point of contention Maher highlighted was a new law requiring department stores with over 500 employees to maintain gender-neutral toy sections. To him, this epitomizes the overreach of government into trivial matters, a distraction from more pressing issues like crime and homelessness. Newsom, when pressed on the issue, defended the law by noting that it had support from the retail industry itself, suggesting it was less about government imposition and more about aligning with market trends. However, this explanation did little to quell critics who see it as emblematic of a broader problem, a government more focused on symbolic gestures than substantive solutions. The unrest tied to recent ICE-related protests has further fueled the narrative of Newsom's leadership failures. Critics, including Maher, have pointed to the governor's initial response as tepid, if not outright inflammatory. Newsom's public statements during the protests, where he appeared to challenge federal authorities with a defiant, come-at-me attitude, were seen by some as posturing for political gain rather than a genuine effort to restore order. His subsequent apology, issued after days of mounting criticism, was perceived as a desperate attempt to backtrack rather than a sincere acknowledgement of missteps. The apology, coupled with promises of arrests and accountability, came too late for many who felt the damage had already been done. This pattern of reactive governance has led to broader questions about Newsom's ability to lead not just California, but potentially the nation. If he struggles to manage crises in his own state, how would he fare on a national stage facing issues like international conflicts or economic downturns? Leadership, as Maher and others argue, requires decisive action and foresight, qualities they claim Newsom has failed to demonstrate consistently. The governor's tendency to lean on polished rhetoric and media appearances rather than tangible results has only deepened skepticism about his presidential prospects. The criticism isn't limited to conservative voices or disillusioned liberals like Maher. Even progressive outlets, such as KBLA, a progressive African-American-owned radio station, have expressed doubts about Newsom's electability. During a discussion on the station, host Tavis Smiley, while acknowledging Newsom's appeal, questioned whether his progressive record in California would resonate in red states or the South. This perspective, coming from a supportive audience, underscores the challenge Newsom faces in broadening his appeal beyond California's liberal strongholds. The state's progressive policies, while popular among certain demographics, are seen as a liability in more conservative regions, where voters prioritize practical governance over ideological purity. The broader context of California's struggles adds weight to these critiques. The state faces a litany of challenges: skyrocketing homelessness, rising crime rates, and a housing crisis that has made it unaffordable for many to live there. High taxes and a regulatory environment perceived as hostile to businesses have driven an exodus of residents, including high-profile figures like Joe Rogan and Ben Shapiro, who have relocated to states with lower taxes and fewer restrictions. This mass departure is not just a loss of population, but a signal that California's once magnetic allure is fading. For critics, Newsom and Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass bear much of the blame for this decline, with their leadership seen as a masterclass in mismanagement. The wildfires and protests are just the latest flashpoints in a broader narrative of dysfunction. During the Los Angeles wildfires, the response from state and local officials was widely criticized as inadequate, with resources slow to mobilize and communication breakdowns exacerbating the crisis. Similarly, the recent wave of civil unrest, particularly in response to ICE operations, has highlighted a perceived lack of accountability. Reports of organized protests, complete with supplies like frozen water bottles and masks, have raised questions about who is orchestrating these events and whether state officials are complicit in allowing them to escalate. Commentators like Bill O'Reilly have suggested that Newsom may have deliberately allowed the unrest to fester, potentially to score political points against federal authorities or to bolster his image among progressive voters. O'Reilly's analysis paints a damning picture of Newsom's motives, suggesting that the governor may be prioritizing his national ambitions over the well-being of Californians. By failing to deploy the National Guard promptly or to support local law enforcement adequately, Newsom's actions, or lack thereof, have been interpreted as a calculated move to let the protests explode for political leverage. This theory, while speculative, gains traction from Newsom's high-profile media presence and his carefully curated image as a progressive leader with national aspirations. His new podcast, billed as a platform for bipartisan dialogue, and his frequent appearances on national news outlets only fuel speculation that he is already laying the groundwork for a 2028 presidential run. The contrast between California's response to unrest and that of other states, like New York, is particularly stark. New York's leadership, under a Democratic governor, acted swiftly to contain protests, deploying resources, and setting clear boundaries to prevent escalation. This decisive approach stands in sharp contrast to California's, where Newsom's initial response was seen as equivocating, if not outright inflammatory. The difference highlights a fundamental distinction between governance that prioritizes public safety and governance that seems more concerned with political optics. For critics, this comparison underscores Newsom's shortcomings as a leader and raises doubts about his ability to handle national crises. The Democratic Party itself is grappling with its own challenges, which further complicates Newsom's position. The party's favorability ratings have plummeted, with recent polls showing approval as low as 27%. This decline reflects growing disillusionment among voters who see the party as increasingly disconnected from the concerns of everyday Americans. The departure of high-profile figures like former White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre from the Democratic fold only underscores this sense of crisis. While Jean-Pierre's reasons for leaving were not explicitly stated, the timing and context suggest frustration with the party's internal dysfunction and its inability to deliver results. For Newsom, these challenges are compounded by the perception that he is more style than substance. His polished appearance and media-savvy persona have earned him a loyal following among some Democrats, but they also invite skepticism from those who see him as prioritizing image over action. The tough guy rhetoric he adopted in response to the protests, only to backtrack with an apology, did little to dispel this perception. Instead, it reinforced the idea that Newsom is a politician in perpetual campaign mode, more focused on managing his brand than governing effectively. The stakes for California and for Newsom's political future are high. The state's challenges, from homelessness to crime to economic decline, are not just local issues, but a potential preview of what a Newsom-led administration might look like on a national scale. If he cannot address these problems effectively, his presidential ambitions may falter before they even begin. The skepticism expressed by voices like Maher, O'Reilly, and even progressive allies like Smiley suggests that Newsom's path to the White House is far from assured. Moreover, the broader implications of California's struggles resonate beyond the state's borders. If the Democratic Party sees California as a blueprint for progressive governance, the state's failures serve as a warning to the rest of the country. High taxes, overregulation, and a failure to address basic quality of life issues could alienate voters in swing states, where practicality often trumps ideology. Newsom's ability to navigate these challenges will determine not only his political future, but also the direction of the Democratic Party as it seeks to rebuild its brand. In the end, the criticism leveled at Newsom reflects a deeper frustration with leadership that seems out of touch with the realities on the ground. Californians are grappling with real problems: crime, homelessness, unaffordable housing, and they expect their leaders to deliver solutions, not sound bites. For Newsom, the road to 2028 will require more than charisma and media appearances. It will demand a track record of results, something that critics argue is sorely lacking. Whether he can rise to the challenge or continue to be seen as a symbol of progressive overreach remains an open question. But for now, the Golden State's golden boy is facing a reckoning.